Sarah was exhausted when she finally arrived home that night. All she wanted was a hot shower and a moment of peace after a long day at work. However, upon opening the door, the sense of security that her home usually provided was instantly crushed by a sight that left her paralyzed. A huge lion occupied the center of her living room, staring directly at her. Sarah's heart began to pound so hard, it felt like it might explode from her chest. The golden eyes of the animal, fixed on hers, glimmered under the dim light of the room, as if studying her every move. She couldn't react immediately. That imposing creature, which belonged miles away on a savanna or in captivity, was there, in her home. Time seemed to freeze. The sounds of the city outside faded away, leaving only the sound of her heavy breathing. In a surge of self-preservation, she ran to her bedroom, slamming the door shut behind her, her heart racing in her ears. Leaning against the door, her hands trembled uncontrollably as she tried to comprehend what was happening. It was impossible. How could a lion have entered her house? More importantly, why? Sarah pressed her head against the wooden door, listening to the heavy footsteps of the animal moving slowly around her apartment. Every movement, every noise it made amplified her terror. She frantically searched for her cell phone. Fear and shock paralyzed her, but a part of her mind began to fight for logic, for solutions. What should she do? The thoughts raced through her head, disorganized and chaotic. Call the police? Escape through the window? Nothing seemed sensible. How would she explain this to anyone? Who would believe her? A lion in her living room? Hearing a deep sigh coming from the living room, Sarah, breathless, approached a crack in the door. Her entire body trembled and her racing heart made her vision pulse. Still, she dared to peek through the small opening. What she saw left her even more perplexed. The lion was lying on the living room rug, its front paws outstretched and its eyes half closed. It looked exhausted, not aggressive. And that's when Sarah noticed a strange detail. There was blood. The initial shock was replaced by a wave of confusion. If the lion had entered her home to attack, why hadn't it done so? And why was it hurt? The sound of its heavy, slow breathing was clearly audible in the silence that enveloped the space. The fear was still there, but something else began to mix with it, a twinge of curiosity. She knew that any reckless move could cost her life, but the sight of that majestic, injured, and seemingly vulnerable animal stirred something inside her that she couldn't ignore. In a surge of survival instinct, she grabbed her cell phone and tried to dial the police. Her hands trembled so much that she nearly dropped the device. When she finally managed to complete the call, her voice came out shaky, almost unrecognizable as she attempted to explain what was happening. "There's a lion in my house." The operator on the other end sounded confused, as if he hadn't heard her correctly. "Sorry, ma'am, could you repeat that?" "A lion! In my living room!" Sarah almost shouted, her voice filled with desperation. But the response was one of skepticism. "Are you sure, ma'am? You might be confused. It could be a large dog." Sarah hung up the phone, frustrated and terrified. They didn't believe her. She knew she would need something more concrete for them to take her seriously. Heart still racing, she opened the door a little wider and stretched her hand to grab her cell phone. She needed to take a picture, but just the thought of exposing herself again to the animal made her body tremble even more. Carefully, she opened the door enough to see the lion lying there, still motionless. Trying to move as quietly as possible, Sarah lifted her phone and, with a hesitant finger, took a picture. The click of the camera seemed to echo through the room, and the lion lifted its head for a brief moment as if it had heard, but it did not react aggressively. The photo was immediately sent to the police. Sarah could barely breathe as she waited for a response. What would she do if the lion decided to get up again? Looking at the photo on her phone, the reality of the situation struck her with greater force. That lion was wounded. There was a large stain of blood on its hind paw. This might explain why it hadn't attacked her immediately, but it didn't lessen the risk she faced. Sarah found herself in a state of absolute alertness. The phone was still in her hand, but her mind was now completely focused on the injured lion before her. The police had finally responded to her message, confirming they were sending a team. She hoped they would arrive quickly, but in the meantime, something deeper was unsettling her. The natural fear of being in the presence of a dangerous predator began to transform into a strange kind of unease, almost empathy. She couldn't deny what she saw. The lion was suffering. Its large hind paw was bloodied and it barely moved. It wasn't the imposing, fearsome creature she had expected, but rather a weakened and exhausted animal. The fear still throbbed within her, but now there was an internal battle between that fear and something she hadn't felt in a long time: compassion. Sarah remembered her childhood when she had a strong connection with animals. She cared for injured birds that fell from their nests and for cats that showed up hurt in her yard. That connection had been interrupted by the difficult years, especially due to the abusive relationship she had endured. She had learned to distrust everything, including her own intuition. But at that moment, the lion before her awakened an old memory, a desire to help. She knew it was irrational. The police were on their way. They were the professionals, and she should stay safe. Nevertheless, her feet slowly carried her toward the room. She didn't know exactly what she was doing, but the sight of the injured animal pulled her in like an invisible force. She grabbed a clean towel and a bottle of water from the kitchen table, trying to ignore how absurd her actions were. When she got close enough, the lion raised its head, and Sarah stopped immediately, feeling her heart in her throat. Its eyes met hers. There was no anger or threat in them, only a deep exhaustion, a silent pain. Sarah hesitated, but she didn't back away. Taking a deep breath, she took another step. The lion did not react, merely lowered its head again, as if accepting her presence. Slowly, with calculated movements, she crouched beside the animal. She could hear its heavy breathing and see the open wound up close. The cut was deep, dirty with dirt and dried blood. Sarah opened the bottle of water and, with trembling hands, began to wet the cloth. She didn't know if she was helping or not, but the simple act of caring for the wound made her feel somehow useful. When she pressed the cloth against the lion's paw, it trembled slightly, but did not pull away. Sarah continued, gently wiping the area around the wound with the damp cloth. It was surreal, but with each passing second, fear gave way to determination. It was no longer about her or the danger she faced, but rather about that animal, which for some inexplicable reason seemed to trust her. She spoke in a soft voice, almost as if trying to calm herself. "It's okay. I just want to help." Surprisingly, the lion seemed to understand. It remained still as Sarah did her best to clean the area around the wound. Time felt different now. There was no more panic, only a strange tranquility in that small act of kindness. And then, a disturbing thought crossed her mind. Who could have done this to him? Before she could think any deeper, the sound of approaching sirens shattered the silence of the room. The police and animal control were finally here. Sarah slowly stood up, feeling an emotional weight take hold of her. She knew she was about to lose control of the situation, that soon the lion would be removed and likely taken somewhere safe. But a sense of responsibility still kept her connected to the animal. When the officers entered, they found Sarah standing next to the lion, who, to their surprise, was calm. There was a moment of disbelief as the agents assessed the scene. The animal control team prepared to capture the lion, but Sarah, driven by an impulse she didn't fully understand, asked them to wait. "He's hurt. Look at his paw. This isn't just a lion that invaded my home. Someone did this to him. He escaped from something. He didn't come here to attack me." The officers hesitated, but the gravity in Sarah's voice and the animal's weakened state made them pause for a moment. The animal control team approached cautiously, and after a brief inspection, they confirmed Sarah's suspicion. The injury was consistent with signs of abuse. One of the agents, visibly disturbed, made a quick phone call. Something bigger was happening. The police quickly launched an investigation. They discovered that the lion had likely escaped from an illegal captivity. The idea that there were people responsible for keeping that animal imprisoned and hurt deeply outraged Sarah. She knew the lion was there because of the suffering he had endured, and this only strengthened the bond she felt for him. As the officers organized to safely remove the lion, a terrible thought crossed Sarah's mind, one she could hardly bear. What if her ex-boyfriend was involved in this? The pieces began to fit together in a sinister way. Sarah couldn't shake the unsettling thought. The wounded lion in her house didn't seem like a coincidence. As the officers and animal control worked to safely capture the animal, her mind raced around a single person capable of such cruelty, her ex-boyfriend. She tried to dismiss the idea, convincing herself that she might be being paranoid, but the pieces were falling into place in a frightening manner. He had always had a disturbing fascination with domination, control, and punishment. Her ex had been manipulative, aggressive, and when their relationship ended, he hadn't taken it well. The threats she received after the breakup still echoed in her mind. The animal didn't seem like a coincidence, but rather a deliberately set trap to scare her. Sarah looked at the lion again, now being examined by the rescue team. The animal, which at first seemed like a deadly threat, now represented something entirely different. He was a victim, just like she had been. And that filled her with a profound sadness and anger at the same time. The control she thought she had over her life had been challenged once more. One of the agents, after checking documents and beginning to trace the origin of the animal, approached her. "It looks like the lion may have come from a network of exotic animal trafficking," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "We've been investigating illegal captivity for months, and everything indicates he escaped from one of them. The injury on his paw was likely caused by mistreatment, probably to prevent him from escaping, but somehow he managed to get away." Sarah swallowed hard, feeling a chill run down her spine. Animal trafficking. It was something she had never imagined would be so close to her reality, but now it seemed alarmingly plausible. She tried to stay calm, but her thoughts were spiraling out of control. There was something darker behind it all, something she couldn't ignore. "I know someone who might be involved," she said, her voice coming out softer than she intended. The police officer looked at her attentively, curious. "Who?" She hesitated. Speaking that name aloud would feel like reopening a wound that had barely begun to heal. Yet the idea of saying nothing made her feel like she might endanger others, and perhaps herself. "My ex-boyfriend," she began, her eyes fixed on the floor, as if it were hard to face the truth she was about to reveal. "He was always driven by anger and resentment. When we broke up, he threatened me. He said I would regret it." The officer furrowed his brow, intrigued. "Do you think he's involved in this? In the animal trafficking?" Sarah took a deep breath, and as she exhaled, her mind seemed to organize the information that had felt disjointed until that moment. "I'm not sure, but it seems like something he would do. He always wanted to intimidate me, to break me. If he knew of a way to do that involving something dangerous, he'd try it. He knew I loved animals. He always used that against me." The officer quickly jotted down a note and exchanged glances with another agent. Something in her account seemed to resonate with them as well. "We'll investigate this further. If your ex is involved, we'll find out." He paused as if trying to find words of comfort, but all Sarah wanted was for this to be resolved. As they stepped away to continue their inquiries, Sarah felt exposed. It was as if her old life, the one she fought so hard to leave behind, was coming back to haunt her in a way she never imagined. The lion, her ex-boyfriend, the terror that once consumed her. Everything seemed to connect in a cruel web of revenge. It was at that moment, while she tried to process everything, that something made her shudder. Outside the window, near the entrance of the building, he was there. The familiar and hateful face of her ex-boyfriend stared back at her, an expression of more than just anger. It was pure disdain. He knew what he had done, and worse, he seemed to be enjoying the fear she clearly felt. Sarah instinctively recoiled, as if the mere sight of him made her vulnerable. Her mind raced between the desire to confront him and the terror of reliving everything he had done. How had he managed to get so close, even after everything? And now he was there, as if watching from the front row the unfolding of his monstrous plan. He took a step forward, which made Sarah's heart race again. Then, with a cold smile, he turned and disappeared into the darkness of the street. Sarah's gaze remained fixed on the empty space of the window where her ex-boyfriend had just been moments before. Blood ran cold in her veins. He hadn't just orchestrated all of this. He was there, watching the pain he had caused, like a twisted spectator. Anger and fear mixed inside her, creating a storm of emotions that she could barely control. But now there was no doubt. He was responsible. Sarah took a step back, trying to process everything. The sounds of the police officers and animal control agents seemed distant, as if she were isolated in another reality. The pain of revisiting that abusive relationship returned with full force, bringing with it the sense of helplessness she had fought so hard to overcome. And now he was there, lurking, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike again. Suddenly, she heard a sound in the hallway of her apartment. The front door, which the police had left ajar, slowly swung open, and for a brief moment, Sarah thought she was about to be overtaken by panic. But then, a familiar shadow appeared in the doorway. It was him, stepping into her house without any hesitation, his expression a mix of fury and satisfaction. There was no need for words to understand why he was there. He wanted to finish what he had started. "What are you doing here?" Sarah managed to ask, her voice trembling as she backed away toward the center of the room. He smiled, a cold smile that made her shiver. "You still don't get it, do you? I told you that you would regret it. No one escapes from me, Sarah." She felt the terror rising, but at the same time, something else ignited within her, a newfound determination, a strength born from months of suffering, resistance, and a desire to reclaim her own life. But before she could respond, the lion, which had been lying down until then, rose slowly, its eyes fixed on the man at the door. The silence between them was pierced by the low growl of the animal. The lion, sensing the tension and imminent threat, positioned itself between Sarah and her aggressor. The creature, which had seemed vulnerable and weary before, now stood tall as a true protector. "You must be joking." Her ex-boyfriend took a step back, visibly unsettled by the lion's presence. Sarah didn't know what was more surreal, the fact that her ex had plotted such cruel revenge, or that the lion he expected to be his weapon was now defending her. An inexplicable strength surged within her at that moment. She was no longer alone. "Do you think you're going to scare me with that?" He tried to maintain a tough facade, but the insecurity in his voice was palpable. He took another step forward, but the lion responded with a deep roar that reverberated through the room. The sound filled the space with a presence that was almost tangible, cutting through any illusion of control the man thought he had. He stopped. The arrogant smile vanished completely, replaced by pure terror. Now he was the prey. Sarah stepped forward, positioning herself next to the lion, feeling a strange sense of security being so close to an animal that just hours before had represented a deadly threat. Her ex's face twisted in rage, unable to process the turn of events. "What did you want? To scare me to death?" Sarah felt the anger rising in her throat. "Did you think a lion would make me come back to you or destroy me? I'm not the same person anymore, and you will not control my life any longer." He shook his head, still paralyzed by fear, but unable to contain the fury that consumed him. "You will pay for this, Sarah. You will—" Before he could finish the threat, the lion stepped forward, roaring once more, and this time it was enough. With a look of pure panic, the man retreated down the hallway, stumbling as he tried to escape up the stairs. Sarah, standing beside the lion, watched as he vanished, the sound of his frantic footsteps echoing through the building. For a moment, everything seemed to move in slow motion. Sarah looked at the lion beside her, still feeling her heart race in her chest. The animal met her gaze, its deep, wise eyes seeming to understand exactly what it had done. It had protected her. The police, alerted by the shouts and commotion, rushed in, finding Sarah and the lion in a tense calm. The obvious question was in everyone's eyes. What had happened here? "He's gone," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the chaos that had just unfolded. "My ex-boyfriend. He was responsible for all of this." The tension in the apartment gradually eased as the officers began to grasp what Sarah was saying. Her ex-boyfriend had been behind everything, and now he was running away like the true coward he had always been. The police were already in action, preparing a search to capture him, but for Sarah, something more important was happening at that moment. She looked at the lion, who had returned to the ground, lying down and exhausted once again, as if the entire episode had been a final explosion of strength before fatigue took over. He had saved her. Of all the things she could have imagined about that day, it never crossed her mind that a lion would become her protector. The animal control agents, who had kept their distance until then, began to approach more cautiously. They knew that capturing the lion was necessary, but now, the situation felt different. The bond Sarah had created with the animal was not just evident, it was strong, and something about it made everyone around hesitate to act hastily. One of the agents, noticing Sarah's emotions, approached her gently. "He needs more intensive medical care," he said softly. "We're going to take him to a sanctuary where he can recover and be treated safely. But you did something impressive here." Sarah nodded, feeling a tight knot in her chest. She knew this separation was inevitable, but the thought of saying goodbye to that creature who, in an inexplicable way, had come into her life and helped her in ways she could never have imagined, was painful. She stepped closer to the lion one last time, feeling the emotional weight of that moment. She crouched near him, lightly touching his thick, worn fur, feeling the rough texture beneath her fingers. She didn't know if he understood the depth of what had happened, but something in his eyes made her believe that somehow he knew he had protected her. "Thank you," she whispered, as if the words could express what she truly felt. "You saved me." The lion took a deep breath, his eyes still focused on her. It was almost as if the animal was as emotionally exhausted as he was physically. For a brief moment, Sarah felt as if everything around her faded away. The police, the agents, the situation itself. It was just her and the lion, sharing a silent connection that transcended fear, danger, and even logic. The agents gently prepared the lion for transport. Sarah watched as he was taken away, feeling a mix of sadness and gratitude. He had come to save her life, not to take it, and now he was being taken to a place where he would finally be safe and could heal. When the door of the transport truck closed and the vehicle began to pull away, Sarah felt a wave of emotions surge within her. She was free, both physically and emotionally. The fear that her ex-boyfriend had always instilled in her, the constant shadow of his threats, all seemed to be crumbling. The lion, in some way, had helped close this dark chapter of her life. As the last police officers left the scene and the house fell silent once more, Sarah allowed herself to sit on the sofa, looking around her living room. The space that once felt safe and familiar now seemed different, laden with memories of what had happened. And yet, inside her, something had also changed. She had overcome. The memories of her abusive relationship still hurt her, but now they didn't carry the same weight. The fear that had paralyzed her before was fading, replaced by a renewed sense of strength. The lion, in his greatness and ferocity, had symbolized for Sarah something she didn't even know she possessed: courage. In the days that followed, she reflected deeply on everything that had happened. The lion was safe in the sanctuary, receiving the necessary treatment. Her ex-boyfriend had been arrested shortly after his escape, and authorities confirmed his involvement in animal trafficking. His threats finally held no power over her. And then something began to grow inside Sarah, a desire to act, to make a difference. Just as the lion had been a victim of cruelty, she was also aware of countless other stories of animals suffering abuse in illegal networks. Now, with the experience she had lived through, she felt she had a new mission. She knew she could help these animals, those who, like the lion, just wanted a chance to be saved and rescued. She decided then that she would dedicate herself to this cause: rescuing animals, fighting against trafficking, getting involved in something bigger. What once seemed impossible now felt like the right path, and in her heart, she knew that every step she took would be a tribute to that majestic creature who had entered her life, protected her, and, in a way, set her free.